Welcome to New Oil and Gas's Annual General Meeting 2018 presentation. This presentation is the equivalent of that which was given at our AGM held on the 24th of January 2018 in Manchester. I would like to use this opportunity to review the company's current performance, discuss the progress that has been made, and look forward to the company's plans in 2018. Given that there has been significant turnover amongst our shareholder base, I believe it would be beneficial for those shareholders who have invested in the company in the last year and have not had the opportunity to attend our AGM in the past. You will, of course, be aware that we are governed by AIM market regulations and stock market rules with respect to inside information, and furthermore with respect to projects where we are in negotiations or targeting. We are governed by confidentiality agreements, and as such there will be certain information we are not able to discuss. I would like to start by touching on a number of highlights of where the company is currently, and then I would like to move on and discuss our current assets. Following that, we will talk about our overall strategy and the evolution of our business model before moving on to where we are currently with a number of marginal field projects. We will look at the project financing, and finally, we will finish with an outlook for the year ahead. The company continues its strong recovery and is on track to deliver on its strategy to focus on the development and production of stranded hydrocarbon assets, generating value from these undervalued producing fields or undeveloped discoveries. Now, despite the sector continuing to feel the effects of the oil price crash, which started in 2014, and the subsequent contraction in activity and reduced investment this caused across the sector, the company's share price has recovered significantly from the summer of 2016, and funds that have been raised have enabled us to provide some stability to the company. This recovery represents the start of a journey which we believe will see New Oil become an established D&P, development and production company, and we believe that our current market capitalization is a fraction of the valuation we believe our strategy can deliver. With respect to our legacy assets in Western Newfoundland, the company has secured agreements with third parties which will enable the company to generate returns from these assets, whilst also enabling us to focus our resources, time and energy on marginal field targets where we believe the greatest growth can be delivered for the company. MF Devco, the company's joint venture in which it has a 50% stake, is on track to secure its first projects, which will enable New Oil to take a significant step towards delivering on its strategy. The board believe that in the year ahead, our strategy will deliver tangible results. I would like to move on to talking about the Garden Hill field in Western Newfoundland, PL200201A. If you look back at where we were just over a year ago now as a starting point, this license was a legacy asset that had been presenting us with complications, and at that point is also outside our target asset profile as stated by our strategy, and at that point there was an obstruction within the well which had been preventing flow. As we announced on the 31st of January last year, we entered into a profit-sharing agreement with PVF, which would enable us to take the project forward whilst minimising the investment and resources required from New Oil in order to do so. The work programme that had been defined, the objectives of that was to clean up the well and remove the obstruction that had been preventing the well from flowing, and ultimately to move on to finish with an extended well test. So the progress that has been made, as we announced in our operational update on the 30th of November last year, all salt blockages had been cleared. Communication had been re-established between the reservoir and the surface, and we were extremely pleased that the pressure recovery we were experiencing, or PVF were experiencing, is strong. There had been and have been no issues with the potential to compromise the successful completion of that first phase of the work program, and also, as we announced, we had begun farm-in negotiations with PVF, which we find extremely encouraging that they are very interested in taking that project forward. Now, in terms of upcoming milestones, clearly the next thing that needs to happen is to complete that first phase of work, of the work program, and completing with the extended well test, and which will then subsequently be followed by the analysis of that data. And the other thing that we need to do in terms of a milestone is to secure the farming agreement, which will then see funding come in to further develop that project. Now, shortly I will talk a bit more about our target asset profile and what we've learnt from this field and how that has played into our current strategy to target lower risk projects. I'd also like to give a brief update on EL1070 in Western Newfoundland. Equally, this is also a legacy asset that doesn't really fit into our target profile. We secured an option agreement which was announced on the 1st of December 2016, an option agreement with G2 Energy Corp. And under the terms of that, G2 will be taking that project forward, and that will enable New Oil and Gas to concentrate our resources on marginal fields, whilst also retaining, should the option be exercised, a 5% gross overriding royalty. I'd now like to turn to our strategy and the evolution of our business model. I would like to focus on a number of key drivers that have been the foundation for us analysing the best way of taking projects forward and the key strategic elements that have come out of that. And having talked about our legacy assets in Western Newfoundland, that is definitely the place we need to start. So the company floated in 2008, and at that point the company was floated with an exploration portfolio with an appraisal asset attached to it. And around the same time there were two key events that happened. One was the global economic crisis, and the second was the end of an oil boom, which had seen a period of very successful exploration. But those two events combined to result in a significant contraction of the investment available for oil and gas projects. And in particular because in terms of the end of the oil boom, the oil price had reduced from almost as high as $150 to almost as low as $30 during that period. And through our discussions at that point, it was clear that it was at that point the exploration portfolio was absolutely impossible to finance, and the appraisal part was actually extremely difficult to finance. So what we then did as a result was started to look at what is the profile of an asset that we should be targeting, which will enable us to put together projects which can raise finance. And clearly the reservoir risk is a significant part of that. And in fact the reservoir risk is the part that we saw that financial backers were most afraid of, not necessarily the risks associated with engineering and technology, as long as the engineering and technology that you're using has been proven. So out of that, we then defined the target asset profile, which we have presented previously within a number of different company presentations. And that is defined as this. In terms of targeting lower risk projects, we target fields where there is no exploration risk, where there is minimal appraisal risk. We also target fields which are located in mature basins, where there is a lot of subsurface data and a lot of knowledge around the subsurface, where there is information available which can be used to define the best way of taking a project forward. So these are not in frontier locations. Similarly, we target fields that are located where there is an existing supply chain, so we avoid some of the issues that we've had in Western Newfoundland. And also we target projects where there is a stable fiscal, regulatory and political regime. So effectively what we're trying to do there is make sure that the profile of the assets that we look at minimizes the uncertainty as much as possible. And as a result of that, makes them a lot easier to finance. Now, of course, the next question around that is going to be, well, if they are lower risk assets, then surely they are going to have a significant value. And this is why another key part of what we do is targeting fields that are currently undervalued, something that is commonly known as being marginal. So what we're targeting is well-appraised assets, so there's no exploration risk, and we are using low-cost solutions, using technology that is proven to then take marginal or undervalued assets and recover the significant resources that they hold. So how do we do that? Well, the key thing is if what we want to achieve is to be able to recover the value from assets that other operators have determined that they are unable to do so, we need to be able to use technology and approaches to engineering which can unlock those projects. So that was the next element that we started to look at. In terms of the technology itself, I think we've already named one of the important factors, and that is that the technology needs to be proven. So there are minimal uncertainties or risks associated with that. Crucially for these projects, that technology also needs to have the ability to significantly lower the through-life costs of the project. And that means not only just focusing on the capex associated with the facility itself, but taking a holistic approach, looking at capex, opex, and ultimately the decommissioning expense, or ABEX. The technology also needs to be appropriate, which is something that I'll come on to again in a minute, appropriate for that project, and able to sustain the levels of reliability, availability, and deliver the highest standards of safety. So the other side of that, of course, is the engineering itself. Now, as you're probably aware, a key driver of the cost escalation that has been experienced in the industry, and specifically within the UK CS, has been down to the types of approaches to engineering that companies have used. And in the past, this has involved designing bespoke solutions for every project, which involves starting from scratch, and also potentially some over-design or gold plating of the facilities, which wasn't necessarily warranted for the project. So what we need to do is we needed to create low-cost technology which could unlock these fields and use approaches to engineering that were equally as efficient. Now, the next key driver that we saw was through the discussions that we had and that actually the entity that is now MF DevCo has had with a whole range of different operators, from small all the way up to the largest, was around the commercial structure that needed to work. And one of the things that we identified was in terms of bringing in a solution to take a project forward, it was going to be easier to do that with a separate entity, as is currently known as MF DevCo, which can come in and propose new ways of taking projects forward to operators. Now, another thing that those discussions made extremely clear was that we needed the capability to be able to actually deliver the projects as well. It was all very well saying we had the technology and the engineering, and we'd identified the right asset profile, but we also needed to demonstrate that we could take projects forward. And as you can probably imagine, if you're working for a large oil company and a minnow such as New Oil and MF DevCo come along and tell you, well, actually we've got the answer for your field, they want to know that you actually have the capability to do that. And that was where we realized that we needed to partner up with companies who, as we say, have the capability to then develop and deliver the project itself. Now, we started negotiations and discussions with large service providers, but ultimately where we got to was we found that we needed to work with a number of different companies. The most effective way of doing that was using a consortium approach to partner up with companies who had similar philosophies to the approaches that we had taken and were willing to challenge the status quo and to embrace new technology which has the capability to significantly lower costs. And also, furthermore, the consortium approach enables us to access, or MF DevCo enables MF DevCo to access the right resources at the right time in the project. So the result of this was our current corporate structure, whereby we have MF DevCo as a project facilitation company, and the consortium who have the capability and resources to deliver projects. And the consortium we will come back to shortly. And the final piece of that puzzle really was looking at how do we finance those projects, which is another topic we will come to later in the presentation. So what are the key strengths of our business model? Why do we believe it can be so successful? Well, as we've said, we are looking at lowering the risks on projects, whether that be through the target asset profile itself, the use of technology, or using a consortium who have the credibility and capability to deliver those projects. We are targeting undervalued assets which also have significant resources should we be able to find an economic way of taking the project forward. And as I say, we have the consortium capability and resources. As a result of being able to reduce the costs associated with a project, and also because of using potentially leasing models or various other ways of reducing the initial capital that needs to be invested, we are able to use lower capital at risk, and also by accelerating as much as possible the development time of a project, we are able to bring forward first production and therefore generate revenue. In terms of the oil price itself, our projects are designed to operate at a very low break-even price, even in comparison to other projects at the moment within the UKCS, for example, where actually there's been a lot of work to reduce OPEX. So our projects are sustainable even if the oil price were to lower. On the flip side of that, whilst we are not expecting the oil price to jump or significantly increase, at the moment we believe that the industry is targeting projects, or in order for projects to be sanctioned, they need to be able to be sustainable without the expectation of significant increases in the oil price. So we see now that actually as oil prices move in either direction, it brings greater number of projects to us. And furthermore, in terms of a guaranteed pipeline of projects, as we've seen in the UK, as basins mature, the number of fields within them that require novel, lower cost solutions for them to be able to take forward is actually increases. And for example, here in the UK, the Oil and Gas Authority have already said that the average size of discovery now is around 25 million BOE, and actually for them of the I think there's undeveloped fields of, or undeveloped discoveries of about 350 which contain about 3 billion BOE within them. They say that the majority of those are considered to be marginal, or what they would deem to be a small pool, by which they mean something lower than 50 million BOE. So, as I say, that as basins continue to mature, the number of projects which are either undeveloped discoveries which we can demonstrate that we can take forward will continue to grow. And also, obviously, as individual fields mature, then that gives us other opportunities to redevelop producing fields. I'd like to just take a few moments now to describe the asset value progression of an oil and gas field and compare that to what we can do should a field be deemed to be marginal. So let's start just with the standard asset value progression for a field that goes through from the exploration phase all the way through appraisal and into production and then to decommissioning. So once a field has been explored and appraised, presuming that it is then deemed to be financially investable and a viable project, it would then get taken on through the final investment decision and into first production. And obviously there's a significant increase in the value per BOE of that field as it goes through that process. As production or operation continues, naturally production rates may drop off, which means that ultimately with fixed costs, that the value per BOE will reduce slightly until eventually sometime later the operator will make a decision that ultimately the project has been maximised in terms of the recovery, and they will take a decision to decommission the field. However, it's important to say that whilst this is a kind of a traditional asset value progression, increasingly projects are getting to the appraisal stage and being deemed that they cannot be there, or people have not been able to identify an economic or viable way of taking the project forward. And as I've just quoted, this is definitely happening in more significant numbers within the UKCS. So let's look at an undeveloped marginal field. So as a marginal field within inverted commas gets to the point at which it is appraised, and if the current operator then determines that they cannot see a way of taking it forward, the value per BOE is going to drop significantly. However, the decision that a project is marginal or is not viable is actually not cut and dried, is the best way of putting it. And that designation of marginal is actually the result of a number of different factors. And those factors are, first of all, the actual development plan or solution that an operator is looking to use on that field. Now, that in itself may also be determined by the location of the field. It could be stranded, it could be in extremely deep water, or potentially it could be as a result of the oil characteristics or reservoir characteristics, such as heavy oil, those sorts of things, which actually will involve a lot more cost in order to be able to produce. Of course, one of the key determinants is going to be the size of the recoverables and the expected production or flow rates. Now, in addition to that, though, obviously we need to consider the commodity prices, so oil and gas, and also the cost of raw materials for the facilities, obviously steel. We would also need to consider the current fiscal regime that the field will operate in, and ultimately the overall commercial environment. All of those factors will combine to determine whether using the proposed solution is a project that is economically viable. Now, whilst a number of fields, a significant number of fields, won't be economically viable using these sorts of traditional approaches that people have used in the past, we know and are very confident that using low-cost solutions, we are able to transform such marginal fields by demonstrating an economically viable way of taking the project forward. And as a result, that reduction in value of the BOE can be recovered, and projects can be taken forward through final investment decision, through into first production, and on and on. Now, of course, that's only one aspect of the market that we would look at. Of course, the other aspect or area where we can target projects that can deliver significant revenue and growth for the company is looking at the redevelopment of producing fields. This diagram is simply a truncated version of the first one we saw, which was the traditional asset value progression. Now, of course, in addition to undeveloped fields being decided or being deemed to be not economically viable, the other thing that is happening in increasing numbers now, particularly after the fall in the oil price, is that fields that are in production are deemed to be no longer economically viable to continue. And of course, the significant drop in the oil price increased those numbers. And obviously, if you have a costly FPSO sat on a field and you're now currently making a loss on the operations, then as a result of that, increasing numbers of operators have had to take the decision to cease production and decommission earlier than they otherwise would have been able to. Now, these present New Oil and MFDevCo with further opportunities, because if we can come in and project that was going to be decommissioned and demonstrate that there is an economic way of extending the life of that, then we can continue to recover hydrocarbon resources and maximize the economic recovery from those projects. And furthermore, as I say, in terms of the oil price crash, this has been happening in increasing numbers, and in addition to the fact that obviously what we want to do is maximize the economic recovery from these projects, The other key thing about decommissioning early is this then realises the decommissioning liabilities not just for the operator and the licensees, but also for governments alike. So it is in the best interests of many different parties to extend the life if we can. So that is how we can transform the value of whether it be an undeveloped discovery or redeveloping a producing field. And before we continue, I would just like to say, please note that these diagrams are representative and they are not to scale, so please don't read into these as the exact numbers that would be generated. So coming back to the consortium model, we've talked about the target asset profile and what we can do with the value. A crucial part of the success will be this consortium model that has been put together by our joint venture MF DevCo, and it is incredibly impressive. I won't go through every single member, but I think it is, if you do take the time to look at whether it be Acker Solutions, who's the latest company to join us, all of these companies have a very strong reputation. They have they are world-class suppliers and specialists within their fields, and what they provide, in addition to the capability and resources and experience to be able to execute and deliver on our projects, they also provide a worldwide network and intimate knowledge of local markets, an intimate knowledge of projects that exist overseas, and obviously some of the challenges or opportunities they may present. And it's important to say a couple more things, I think. First of all, that from a business development point of view, all of the members of the consortium are able to identify projects and bring those to MF DevCo and subsequently to New Oil as opportunities for us to develop as a consortium. And that has happened and is extremely useful. And then the other thing to point out at this juncture is that all of these companies have, before joining the consortium, done their own due diligence on MF DevCo and Oil and the overall approach that has been proposed to taking these projects forward. And these companies have all looked at that and realised that it is viable and it's the way forward for marginal fields. So we believe that endorsement that they provide is incredibly important. And as I said earlier on, it provides significant credibility for negotiations with operators and license holders. So now I would like to touch on our marginal field projects themselves. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, unfortunately we are unable to give specific detail of the actual projects that we are currently targeting. But I'd like to take you through the work that has been done, where we are at the moment, and what we're looking forward to doing next. Now, we have performed the initial screening on quite a large element of the market and a specific target criteria that meets our asset profile that we discussed earlier on. And we have, and this means, when I say we, I mean New Oil, and in conjunction with MF DevCo, engaged directly with license holders and operators, both at the small end of the scale all the way up to majors. And those conversations have been extremely encouraging in terms of the approval, should I say tacit approval, or actually outright endorsement of the types of approach that we are proposing for these types of fields. As I say, consortium members have also brought projects to MF DevCo to be developed by the consortium, which is extremely important. And we have then focused our resources on a number of priority targets, which we've obviously gone through initial screening, gone through the suitability assessment, and are advanced on our negotiations with a number of different parties. And of course we work closely with the consortium to all the way through that process, and at a critical juncture as well during the due diligence. So where are we at the moment and what needs to happen next? Well, we are working on a number of obviously elements of due diligence as we take projects forward. After that, we would be, slightly in parallel with as we move that forward, other elements that we would need to address are project financing. Clearly, we would need to then enter into contractual arrangements with parties, which would then lead on to us completing a field development plan and leading on into detailed design, construction, installation, commissioning, and through to production. Focusing on due diligence at the moment, some of the key elements that we need to complete. Obviously, we need to do due diligence around the engineering factors and technology that we'd be using within our solution for any project. We need to take into consideration the local regulatory regime and the taxation or fiscal regime within that area. We would need to look at what operational requirements are there, particularly if we are going to be the operator. So what would we need within that jurisdiction to be able to do that? We would need to design the most appropriate financial strategy, and that will be very specific to that field and project. Contractual terms I've already mentioned, but it is clearly these contracts for these projects are incredibly complex, and there's a lot of attention paid to those. And finally, but certainly not least, a subsurface model. We need to do due diligence around that subsurface model to make sure that we understand what the expected profile of the project would be. And ultimately, that subsurface model underpins absolutely everything that we do. So moving on now to project finance. The solution that we would use for project financing is also going to develop or be based upon a number of key elements. First of all being, are we looking at a development of a greenfield site or an undeveloped discovery? Alternatively, the redevelopment of a producing field. Another element that will impact is what type of transaction we're looking at, and whether the existing operator or license holder is looking for an overall sale, whether they want a farming agreement, or ultimately whether they've approached, for example, MF Devco simply as a provision for the provision of a solution, an engineering solution. That would then lead on to what role is being played by MF Devco and New Oil within the project. We would also consider the elements that are going to go into the solution, and clearly the scope of those. One of those, obviously one option could be that we are providing a plug-in solution into existing infrastructure, or alternatively we could be proposing an entire new full field development plan. And within both of those, of course, a key element is going to be what drilling requirements are there, because clearly that is going to drive costs, whether that be for wells, for water or gas injectors. So all of those would be considered. Obviously, the regulatory regime itself is going to also drive parts of the decision about how we can finance that project, and ultimately the overall engineering solution. Now, there are a couple of elements that I think it's worth pointing out with respect to the project financing, and areas where the current market presents some significant opportunities. And those are around two of the most important elements of the projects themselves, namely around rigs and the construction at yards at the moment. In terms of drilling, the market has, the bottom has kind of dropped out of the drilling rig market, and we have seen or have been quoted numerous instances where payments for services can be deferred until a project is in production. And those give us some quite interesting opportunities with respect to financing. In addition, for the facilities themselves, construction yards have experienced a significant downturn as well, and there are numerous facilities that are available and can be constructed at very favourable terms, with either little or no equity involved. And repayment is certainly available via finance lease and potentially via operating lease arrangements. So these sorts of vendor financing provide us with some very significant opportunities. And it is the availability of these sorts of financing arrangements that provide us with the confidence that a larger element of the project returns that the strategy creates can be retained within-house. I'd like to finish by talking about the outlook for the company. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, we are extremely confident that our strategy will see tangible results in the future. And as I'm sure it's become clear from this presentation, that what we need to achieve, or what we're looking forward to achieving, is first of all securing our first marginal field project through our joint venture MF Devco. And there are a number of milestones in association with that, going through the due diligence phase, concluding the contractual terms, securing project financing, and through field development approval and onwards. In addition to that, as we're working on a number of projects, obviously we are looking forward to securing a further project after that, and we are also confident that the announcement of an initial project will raise the profile both of the company and of the overall marginal field initiative, and attract a number of further projects on from that. In terms of our legacy assets, naturally the key thing we need to be doing there is, in conjunction with PVF, is completing the first phase of the operations, including the extended well test, and then using that data to define and specify the further work program, and securing a farming agreement which will further fund the development of the project. I would like to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. If you have any further questions, feel free to contact me. My name is Simon Bargrave, and you can contact me at investor.relations@nu-oilandgas.com. Thank you very much.